Hi there, my name is Muhammad, and I'm the host of the Reconfigured podcast, a show that explores the intersection of technology, culture, and society. We bring professionals to talk about their extended experience or discuss about a specific topic that might interest the audience. All of our episodes are available for free with no cost to the general public. Just a quick reminder that we are always on the lookout for interesting guests who can share their unique perspective on the topics we cover, or you can pitch in a new topic to discuss on the pod. Just reach out to us on social media or apply to our available opportunities posted on Polywork. So, welcome to the show. Today I'm with Tiffany. Tiffany, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Jachja. I'm an engineering manager at Vox Media. I'm also a career coach and podcast host, and I'm super excited to be here to answer some questions and share more about my career.
Great. You recently started a new position as a career success coach at Correlation One. Would you like to talk more about them and what they offer?
Yeah. So, Correlation One is a startup in the enablement space. So, they offer programs. They're best known for their data programs that essentially help people who may not have a technical or a data background come into tech and then start their data careers. And one of the biggest programs and partners that they have is AWS and Amazon. And so, different workforces will encourage employees to sign up for those programs and go through them and start their careers in tech. And so my role as a career success coach is to help supplement that boot camp or that program experience for folks who may not have a lot of experience in getting their first tech job. So whether it's through helping them with their resumes or their first technical interviews, that's what a career coach helps support the folks going through the program on. And so I actually noticed that they were hiring and looking for contractors to start, and I thought it would be a really cool way for me to share what I know, especially be at, like having been on both sides of the table, whether I'm getting interviewed or I'm interviewing someone, and that it would be a cool way to also extend my network. So getting to know, new data folks or for people who are going to potentially be creating something when they are starting their tech journeys or as they are building up skills that are technical in nature and that solve a lot of problems through software.
So it's like a boot camp.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so how much like the duration of the boot camp? So usually like they're 6 months intensive or some of them like 3 months super intensive.
Yeah,
And
yeah. So some of them are 3 months, some of them are 4 months, 6 months. The nice thing about Correlation One is that they'll work with they don't, they have an application process. So if you are not currently employed, or maybe you are employed, but your employer is not the um, sole like coordinator of like getting you into that program, you'll be able to basically submit an application to that boot camp and they'll review it, and if you're accepted then you're going to be enrolled in that program. And once you're in that program, you're expected to keep up with the coursework, work on the projects, the content, go through the content, and it's up to you to get what you want from it. It's almost like signing up for a class or a workshop and then having to, you know, it's not 100% self-paced. There are deadlines and things like that, but it encourages you to go through um, the curriculum, if that makes sense.
yeah. So as like a career success coach, so let's assume the fact that I'm a student who enrolled in this boot camp. So I would come up to you and I tell you like, what should I focus on when it comes to, let's say, my CV, or what should I focus on to get into the market as like an example?
Yeah, yeah. So you can ask questions that are more practical and strategic in that sense. Like, okay, this is my goal. How can you help me? Or what is your advice on this particular um, situation? And I can provide context in the sense of having seen other people go through the process, having gone through it myself, what other people have done, what could be a practical approach. You could also go at it from a completely different angle. So if you are struggling with the the course, and maybe you're not necessarily struggling with the coursework, but maybe you're lacking in motivation. Something that a career coach would be able to do is help you gain more clarity around your goals, and so that way, say for example, someone's going through the program and they're just really struggling with seeing a potential path in the future. That may impact what they're willing to invest in terms of effort and time. And, maybe they have other things going on in their lives. They may have, people to take care of, other work, other projects, other interests. One thing that a career coach can help you with or help you through is helping to define, what is your vision, what could be a plan moving forward, and work through it in a timeline that works for you.
Okay, so I'm gonna move to a different question, which is you work as an engineering manager at Vox Media. Would you like to talk about the interesting things you did there? So,
Yeah.
just the question is, Vox Media as like the media company that produces news. As I'm not
Yeah. Yeah.
American. I'm not American, so
Yeah.
that's fine.
So Vox Media owns a variety of properties like The Eater, um, The Verge, Polygon, SBN. So if you've ever read any articles or stumbled across any of the properties that are owned by Vox, that's what we do. We're a media company, and I'm an engineering manager for the data products team. And some of the things that I've done during my time as an engineering manager there is really grow the engineering and the data engineering practices at the company. So one thing that I really try to focus on in my role as an engineering manager is to ensure that our practices help support the development and research of actual projects and products that we're delivering. And, that requires a variety of things, whether it's creating the milestones, providing input on what needs to be done, representing my team's work. All of that needs to be articulated and communicated and strategized on so that we are able to not only design systems that are robust, latent, can serve millions of people on our sites, but that it's also really fun and exciting for the engineering team that I lead. And that's something that I tried to enforce because I think a lot of teams um, are often often fall into this pitfall of doing work for the sake of doing work, and they don't quite ever get to see the impact of it. And my role is to be able to ensure that the code that my team writes, the things that they're building, do get loved, do get understood, do get used. And I think that's the kind of work that I enjoy, and I know my teams will enjoy, and that's what I prioritize as a leader.
So it's more like you make the person feel the appreciation of writing the code because it will impact other people.
Yeah, yeah. And there's different ways to make someone feel appreciated and feel like they can come into work, make decisions, build the skills that they're looking for. Um, but at the core of it, right, I want people to be able to understand that what they care about is going to map to actions and help them achieve their career goals.
So, other than the fact that you're an engineering manager, what is the role of an engineering manager in general, and what does it differ between a tech lead? So, based on what you've actually provided, it seems similar to an engineering manager, similar role to a tech lead, but they might differentiate on some small aspects. Would you like to give more insights about that?
Yeah, yeah. So at the heart of it, every engineering team has different levels of support, and it really depends on how a company likes to provide that support, whether it's through a tech lead title or a engineering manager title. You'll often also get like titles like product manager, project manager, program manager. Those are just all to provide support to the actual engineering team. What a engineering manager does can differ from team to team and company to company, but at a high level, you're typically the people manager, meaning that your direct reports are engineers and you are managing the engineering work on specific teams. Engineering managers can also manage other managers. They can also manage multiple teams, but the main focus is the actual engineering support work.
So, like when an engineering manager can manage other teams, so I, as an engineering manager, can manage a tech lead in a certain team, as like an example.
Yeah. Yeah, so an engineering manager could, for example, manage a tech lead and then an intern or an entry level engineer, and they could have multiple reports on that team. And so they would basically work with the tech lead, with the other engineers to understand the work that's being accomplished, what are the challenges around there, and they help organize and manage those challenges. So, say for example, we need approval to integrate with a new open API service. My role would be to make sure that we have the right budgeting in place, the right approvals in place, and a corporate account so that we can do the development with that new service. So those are some things that I will do. Also, when it comes to ensuring that leadership understands the goals of projects, I'm the one in leadership meetings representing my team's work. I'm also the person who's highlighting my team's accomplishments, making sure that other teams understand what we do. Say, for example, another team is working on a project and they need some data support. One thing I can do is make sure that someone on my team gets paired up with another engineer on that team and that, knowledge is shared. So I help bridge and connect gaps in that way too across the organization.
Cool. I'm gonna move to a different question. I think I've dived deep into the whole engineering manager, but it was a really good insight about this. So I didn't know that there's a manager that manages the tech lead. What I thought was the tech lead was the kind of guy who reports to the CTO directly, or maybe it's just a hierarchical thing within each company.
Yeah, sometimes it's hierarchical. Like in startups, like a lot of Silicon Valley based startups, you initially start with some leader in tech. Some companies don't even start with a CTO. So, if you're a startup, you'll have a CEO, you'll have some founder, maybe an operations person, and then you'll have what's called a head of engineering. That's a newer term within the tech ecosystem. And essentially, that head of engineering can serve as the CTO, a VP, and the director of engineering. And so that head of engineering is the person who's doing all the interviews, building the initial engineering team. And so they'll typically hire a tech lead or someone who's very senior to be able to dive in deeper into the work quickly, right? And so that person will report into a head of engineering. A head of engineering role is sort of interchangeable. Oftentimes, head of engineers become CTOs. You're just in that more senior upper management type of role. And that's when you can report into either a director or VP or a CTO, and you kind of circumvent that engineering manager having to report into an engineering manager, or even having to hire engineering managers until you start breaking down different teams and different sections and you require that. So it just depends on how you're building your organization, how flat is the company. And oftentimes, if you're in your company, you're relatively flat, right? There's probably not as much middle management going around. And so you'll have direct reports reporting directly into senior management. When it becomes a lot of overhead, or say, for example, now we are building like an engineering team, the head of engineer has 100 engineers reporting into them. they may not have the bandwidth to be able to meet with everyone, to manage the work appropriately. So after a while, it just becomes really hard to scale and ensure that you're getting all of the information and that it's being articulated in a very clear way, right? There's a lot of information, and there's a different way to organize it. And there are things like Conway's law that talks about like how you're organized in a company or in a hierarchical structure will impact how your software is designed. And so a lot of people will, help as their product is being built or as their solutions being built, they'll realize like it's actually really helpful for a team to be organized in this way and consists of these kinds of engineers and specialties versus having everybody just report all into one person as a bucket. It starts to become harder and harder to understand what are the responsibilities, who's allowed to touch this part of the code or who's mostly responsible for this part of the code, right? It just becomes harder. And so that's when additional structures or additional processes or even additional roles are really helpful.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Like I've seen like the structure where I currently work in is just like a flat where I just can report directly to the CTO. Like we used to have a tech lead, but now we direct directly to the CTO. We never had this idea of a head of engineering, and then there's an engineering manager, and then there's a tech lead, and then I have to report to this person, and this person has to report this person, and this person has to report to that. But I think as a company grows bigger, let's say like Vox as an example, you have loads of products. Each product should be controlled by each person. Each product should be managed so that it doesn't, I'm going to say this, keep on moving, serving a lot of people. So this is why they need this kind of structure. But not every single company do need this structure, because
Yeah.
you see companies like, for example, they put different kind of management that just making it a lot more complex to do a very simplistic thing than just doing the product.
Yeah, and I recommend people pay attention to how your engineering organization is structured. Like at Vox, we have, our individual contributors, so our engineers, our product and project managers, and then we have engineering managers who only manage the engineers. And then we have directors, which manage managers, and then that goes into a CTO role. Sometimes you'll have another layer where it's just um, uh, vice presidents, VPs of engineering, and those people will manage the directors. So you can get varying levels of hierarchy. Those are I've just gone over like all the potential roles and titles. Like I said, the head of engineering can often absorb like the VP and the director titles. Once you're an SVP, that's similar equivalent to a CTO or C level. You're pretty much there. You just don't have the C level title. Um, and sometimes you'll even have organizations where CTOs report into operations, COO. It's like that at Vox, but um, because of that, you can kind of tell. And some places, and in some places, right, the CTO doesn't report into a COO or CIO; they go straight to the CEO, right? And that's when you know that company will most likely be a engineering company, engineering or tech company, because they don't have it sit under operations or finance or revenue. It's its own entity where that shows that there's a business line, a direct business line that falls under technology itself. When you see things fall under revenue or operations, that focus is shifted. Now, technology is a function of operations or it's a function of revenue. And so your goal isn't quite to focus on the engineering, it's to focus on the revenue impact. There's actually a really good talk called Riding the Architect Elevator that I recommend. If you just search it up, you'll find like a bunch of videos and content around it. But they talk about how engineering is structured and how it can be structured differently and what it means when you have a CTO or you have your engineering org fall into different parts of an organization. It's a really good talk.
I'm going to move to a different question, which is you worked as a technical evangelist at Harness. What is the role of a technical evangelist, and is it similar to, let's say, a developer advocate, or what makes it different from, let's say, another role like developer relations?
Yeah, so I worked as a technical evangelist at a startup called Harness. Um, to answer your question about developer relations, dev advocate, what does that all mean? The umbrella term is developer relations that captures pretty much anything you would do under the realm of um, communicating and being in a community with other developers. Within developer relations, you have different roles, like a developer relations manager, community manager usually falls under there. You have dev advocates, and you have technical evangelists. You can have other new titles and that sort of thing. Of course, that'll always pop up, but it'll always sit under a developer relations type classification. As a developer advocate, you are advocating for the developer community. So there's a lot of one-to-one interactions and bringing like feedback directly to stakeholders and product stakeholders. In technical evangelism, you're evangelizing on behalf of a product or that company's solution. And so you're evangelizing different practices that help integrate or help get the community, the technology community, further ahead. And so the focus is a little subtle, but really you're doing a lot more. I would say thought leadership or leadership in the sense of guiding others versus in a developer advocate role. You're mostly focused on advocating for that developer. So you're not coming in with too many assumptions. You may have a back and forth, or you may have some suggestions in response to other people's responses. And so there's a little bit of overlap there, but the main focus is a little bit different from each perspective, if that makes sense.
So, so the developer relations or developer advocate, I would advocate towards the developer inside of a community, while the technical evangelist, I would have, let's say, like a product, and I would come up and pitch you the product in some way.
Um, so it's a little bit more nuanced in that sense. Every developer relations team, individual, anyone who's falling under the umbrella of developer relations, they're representing either a product or a solution. So, if I'm a developer advocate for a company that offers an API or an SDK, then I will be talking about how, or showcasing demos and like helping the community understand how to use that product. What I'm doing as a developer advocate is I'm advocating for developers that use that product. As a technical evangelist, I am teaching and sharing like some of the practices that you would use so that you can, so yeah, so it's more of an education standpoint. Um, Also, um, if there's certain communities that could really benefit from the solution, you're bridging the gap between those different communities as well, and you're doing that as a leader. It's more of like I'm standing on a podium and I'm evangelizing to you because I know that this solution could solve your problems. So we understand some of the market's solutions first. We understand the market very well. So oftentimes too, you can have developer advocates help technical evangelists understand the market, where people are at, what are the different levels of engineer or developers that are using the product, and help evangelize to those people. The dev advocates are building like additional material. So that's the common ground, that we're both building material to help educate, but the function of how that happens differs.
So to recap on what's currently what has been discussed, so the technical evangelist, I would pitch in on a product and I would give you, let's say, best practices regarding, let's say, this product. The developer advocate is the kind of person who deals with developers. They would listen to what kind of issues they might have, or let's say a certain feature or suggestions, so they can share it back with the stakeholders to add it to, let's say, this kind of SDK or this API. So if I'm a developer and I came up to a developer relations or developer advocate, I would tell them like, hey, this SDK, it would be much more easier if we did this, and he will take notes. He will share it, let's say, with the developers who's been developing this SDK, and they might add it as a feature or they might improve it. While
Yeah.
the technical evangelist is the kind of person who, let's say, for an example, there's product X, and I will give you the best practices for product X to solve your problem.
Yeah, and sometimes there's a little bit more education that goes behind like being able to use product X. Maybe you need to set up a new process. You know, maybe you need to understand that there are other solutions in the marketplace. Maybe you need to understand the different the ecosystem around the space as well. Or you want to be able to extend how you're using the product. So there's a little bit more that also goes into that. The technical evangelism role is not a entry level role, like a developer advocate role might be. Even though a developer advocate role, some people and I think you could argue that it's not an entry level role either. But you know, a lot of what the technical evangelism role is meant to do um, is also help with the help drive that community or that industry as well. And so you're really looking at different conferences, different companies in the space, and you're thinking about what solutions can you also present in order to further that community or that industry as well. And so I one thing that was pretty interesting that I got to do at Harness that I didn't really quite get to do in other roles as a engineer, or as a consultant, or even as an engineering manager now, is I got to launch programs and solutions that would help bridge those gaps. So I worked on a virtual conference event, which is now hybrid slash physical. I also worked on a developer recognition program within the community. And that's really cool because you get to share stories and like highlight people's work and, you know, do more. And I was in the cloud space and do more of the cloud centric and improve the culture around there. So you get to make it what you will. And it's truly visionary in the sense that, you know, you're working with a community. There's different ways to do it, right? Like as a developer advocate, there are different ways that you can interact with your community. But I found that with the technical evangelism role, I got to come in with the seniority of being able to lead and launch programs and then also do that within my community. So that's actually how I ended up becoming the outreach committee chair at the Continuous Delivery Foundation.
But you also worked as a consultant at Red Hat. We're speaking about cloud-centric things. When we say that you worked as a consultant, that you would work with clients similar to how like the big four operates, like PwC or KPMG, when they say that we have a consultant, you would work with the consultant, or is it like something else? Because the word consultant is very nuanced. Like when you see the word consultant at, let's say, PwC, he can be a software developer, he can be a business kind of guy, or he can be another any kind of role, but they call them as consultants. But rather
Yeah.
you can be a consultant in something else.
Yeah. So I will describe that nuance here because I think it's really, sometimes it can be really confusing, especially for people who are starting out. So whenever you hear consultant, it's synonymous with contractor, right? If you work at a company as a consultant in the sense that you will be consulting for other companies on behalf of the company you work for, your employer, then you sit under the part of the organization known as professional services. And so basically, on behalf of the company or your employer, you are providing professional services, solutions, et cetera, work, code, right? For companies that have contracted your employer for them, you know, for a particular task or goal or project or team. So, as a consultant at Red Hat, I was assisting Fortune 500 companies with open source and cloud native, container native solutions for their software engineering needs. And so I did quite a bit of work there where I would basically come onto a project, understand, the client needs, understand the ecosystem, onboard very quickly, and then deliver solutions. So write code. If they needed refactoring, if they needed a new test suite, if they needed more automation, it really depends on the scope of work, and that work gets scoped out by a professional services management team. Salespeople are involved in that process. They budget the travel, they budget how many hours you're going to be working, et cetera, et cetera. And basically you're just on from one project to the next. Sometimes you can work multiple projects. You then have other companies. It's common. It happens in more enterprise type companies, health, finance areas, where they will hire a contractor for maybe a 6 month or 2 month period. You know, um, and that person is a whatever they get hired to be, uh, architect, a software engineer. And after that 2 month period, you're either it's contractual. So if you're not renewed, then you're moving on. If you're not converted into a full time role, you're also moving on. And so those are basically temporary contracted positions, right? So in one case, you're consulting where you're temporary for other companies, and you're permanently or you're full time employed at a company. And in the other sense, you're hired on as a contractor or a software engineer as a contractor, and then you may also be called consultant in that sense as well. Some people do like to actually some one of my colleagues, he used to be an architect. Now he's starting his own company, and on the side he's contracted as an architect at another company, and that helps pay his bills while he's still figuring out what he's doing with his startup. So that's kind of a fun fact. There is, you can use contractual positions to your benefit, if you are kind of working on other side projects, or you don't need the actual commitment of working a fully employed, full time role. But of course, like, things differ, and expectations are different for each position, each role. So I would double check on those work expectations and that sort of thing before you kind of go in and get into any trouble.
Mostly those double checks is that when you work as a contractor, I think for a company, let's say, the differ between them. If you work with a big company that hires you as a contractor for, let's say, the Fortune 500 companies, that big company is going to give you, let's say, like health insurance. Whereas, let's say, the company that is going to hire you as a contractor on the side assumes the fact that you're going to get your own health insurance, they're not going to pay for it. So there are some services you don't get as a contractor. Whereas where a big company, when they hire you as a contractor, they support everything, but you work as a consultant or a contractor with that small company or that company in general through them, as as we can say. But when you work individually with a company, let's say as a contractor, just so you can save up, or you're doing a side on work on the side, you have to cover other stuff like insurance and filing your own taxes and all of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So that's an important nuance, is if you're a contractor, you may not get all of the employer's benefits. If you are sitting under professional services as a consultant, you're fully employed, you'll get all of the company's benefits. So as a consultant at Red Hat, right, under professional services, I had, RSUs, I had all the employee benefits. If I as I was consulting on different projects, as a contractor on different projects, like I worked for X company and Y company, I did not get their employer benefits. Like, I wasn't enrolled in their 401k and they were giving me a paycheck. I was only getting paid through my professional services employer. So that is an important thing to know.
Yeah. I'm going to move to a different question, which is that you have a master's degree from Georgia Institution of Technology, where you did Masters of Computer Science, Machine Learning. As someone who's into machine learning and data science, is the master's is the master's degree a necessary, or is just like an academic approach to learning stuff like math and statistics, since it aids you better than learning them on your own? So I tried learning machine learning on my own, and there's this math and statistics part where it really kicks you real bad if you're not a master's kind of person, or you have to learn them on your own, or it's been like a very long time to learn them. But when you enter as in a master's degree, I think you just get refreshed on this kind of information. Is that
Yeah, I think that's true for any academic background. Is, in academia, you get a lot of support and it's all like built into a curriculum with projects and that sort of thing, versus in self-taught, you may not know what the right order of operations should be, what order to take classes, like what concepts should get introduced before other ones, what would make things a little bit easier in terms of understanding. I think that within the industry, it really depends whether or not a master's degree is required. So, if it depends, there's a lot of different kinds of roles within the data science and machine learning industry. Like if you're going to be doing any work around computer vision, object detection, self-driving cars, it's actually really helpful to have a master's degree or at least higher level education, because there are a lot of mathematical concepts that borrow from physics and math, and going through a educational program, you have to take those courses before you're accredited, right? Versus in a self-teaching kind of methodology, you may not you may have missed the concept that is core to how you're going to be able to contribute as a computer vision engineer, ML engineer, that sort of thing. Also, if you're going to be doing any, if you're going to be working in a research lab where you're contributing to maybe like AWS's data science group or Meta's data, like a lot of these bigger companies, the FANG companies, they have a research arm. The requirement is that you have a PhD, and that it's also super competitive amongst PhD students. So they look at things like publications, how often were you presenting at top tier conferences, what was your paper, what were your papers, research papers about, how often were they cited, and that sort of thing. So depending on what kind of role you're looking for, the requirements kind of scale up from there. And that's just because at this moment, we're still learning a lot about different kinds of approaches to machine learning. And there is a lot of research in the space and a lot of learning within the community. And one way that you can showcase that you are not only aware of the changes in the industry, you are also the person pushing boundaries and expanding the understanding within the machine learning space. One way to showcase that, if you were to look at if you're interviewing or look at the paperwork behind that, is if you're a PhD student, or is if you have contributed publications within the space that have been peer reviewed and understood. So you get situations like that happen sometimes. I would say that if you're looking to become like a data analyst, or develop machine learning models, or even get to train and deploy them into production, that has less strict requirements. So I've seen folks who have like a statistics background, or even maybe a more non-traditional technology background, get their roles in data engineering, ML engineering, where and do really well too, where a lot of the focus is more on the engineering work and maybe less on the actual research / development / programming of models. So sometimes that happens.
I'm going to move to a different question, which is assuming the fact that I'm someone who's entering in a new company and there's an engineering manager on the team. What is like the expectations that I should expect from this manager? So assuming the fact that I entered the team and you are my engineering manager, so what would I expect, like the kind of workflow would I will be reporting to you, or how's the flow would happen like on a weekly basis, if you're going to say?
Yeah, okay. That's a really good question. If you were to come onto a team and I was there as an engineering manager, the expectations can differ quite a bit. But at a minimum, I would expect that the engineering manager checks up on your work and you provide them status updates. You're either providing a status update to your team or to your engineering manager. Regardless, you'll have some time with your engineering manager where you're going to be talking about and discussing the work at hand. So, if you're programming something or you're in the middle of some type of feature implementation, that kind of conversation will come up in the touch points. I may ask questions as an engineering manager, ask questions about how the work is going, how your week is going. And then that's a good time for you to be able to air out any complaints, any challenges, that sort of thing. And based off of that, I can then go and either create new processes or address some of the action items that are needed from our conversation. You can also expect things like shout outs and that sort of thing when work is completed, because that's also a big part of what I do as an engineering manager is I highlight the accomplishments and the behaviors that I really that I value and that we value, that we've defined as a team. And so you do that through, leading the team and that sort of thing. You can also expect different conversations around understanding the actual work that's upcoming. So, a lot of engineering teams will work in increments. So every 2 weeks they'll do a release, every 1 week they'll do a release, something like that. That's known as a sprint if you work in the agile methodology, with the agile methodology. And in a sprint, you'll follow different team ceremonies, and your engineering manager will be a part of things like the retrospective, planning, and that sort of thing if you have those team ceremonies. And so in those conversations, they can help plan or plot out like a good next step for you as well. So, if you're about to finish a work or feature requirement, you're almost done coding something, right? You may tell your manager, hey, I'm actually going to be done around this time. What do you think is the next good step? That's a good person to speak to, is your engineering manager, because they can then work with your project manager or your program manager, or whoever is coordinating the work, to make sure that you're getting work that is interesting or that is a good evolution of what you've been working on. And so they'll help guide that work as well.
But as I'm going to say this, the engineering manager, if he's working in an agile way, will he be also reporting to, let's say, the scrum master? Because I would remember in like the agile way, there's the product owner, there's the scrum master, and there's the developers.
Yeah, so if you're working in a Scrum methodology, you have three kinds of roles. You have the Scrum Master, which you mentioned, you have a product owner, and then you have the actual Scrum team. And so in that methodology, like the Scrum Master, that role can actually be passed down to anyone on the team. You can actually alternate like who gets to be a Scrum Master each sprint. But basically, you have different activities associated with the Scrum. The Scrum Master ensures that no work is being blocked, and then the Scrum team is is the team that commits to the work that will be delivered at the end of the sprint. Your product owner helps prioritize that work and ensures that whatever gets committed for that sprint doesn't change during that process, and that they're okay with what's going to be committed and delivered at the end of the time frame. So if you are a engineering team with an engineering manager and you're working a Scrum pattern, you may be a part of the Scrum team that delivers the work, or you may be someone who's overseeing some of that. From a organizational perspective of who reports into who, right? Your engineers still report into your engineering manager. The Scrum Master is sort of like a title that gets, or a role that gets passed around amongst the team. If you have a project manager, a program manager, that's not your product owner, they can be your Scrum Master. Your product owner can also be your Scrum Master, but you usually don't want that to happen because as a product owner, you own the mission and the vision and the roadmap of whatever the product is. But, when you're so closely tied to the product, you may just say, I want you to commit to everything, and make sure it puts a lot of pressure on the team. So typically you have someone else be in that role. I mean, I've been a scrum master as like a software engineer before too, and it's kind of cool because you get to run like daily stand up and say like, go next, go next, go next, and you take notes and you make sure that if there's any blockers that you can also like tell your engineering manager if you need your engineering manager to step in. So things like that. The nice thing is like if your engineering manager does need to step in, or maybe you get a lot of work requirements and it's at the point where you're like, I don't really, everything keeps changing. Your engineering manager can be someone that advocates and says, like, hey, when things change a lot, this impacts our technical work in this way and our engineering work this way. We have a lot of technical debt, all this stuff. So they can help make sure that the team's like health, mental health, like capacity, efforts, all that stuff is fully represented and feels good across the team.
So I'm gonna move to a different question, but the whole insight of the whole Scrum Master thing is quite interesting. I didn't know that the title of the Scrum Master gets passed on. What I thought is you have the product owner is the person who's in contact with, let's say, the client who gets what they want. The product managers, or usually, let's say, the Scrum Master or someone who manages the product. And I used to think like the Scrum Master is the product manager, that just the title that they give in the Scrum space, because there's no product manager in the Scrum world, so
Mm.
they just give it as a Scrum Master. And the developers is the persons who inside the team. But I didn't know that the Scrum Master title can be given between people. I thought it's like a fixed role.
No, yeah. So if you study like Scrum, Agile, like at its fully like vanilla, like untouched traditional definition, it is a role that gets passed around. But one thing that you brought up, which is really interesting, is that oftentimes different companies or different teams will like change their agile methodologies to work for them, and it works for them, and that's just as valid as the original approach. And that's where it can sometimes get really confusing. One thing that I've had to do in my career is just really understand and study what are the agile methodologies, like what are they in the untouched original form, so that when we do deviate from them, we know exactly why we do that. And from a like early career perspective, you start to understand like, oh yeah, maybe if we don't switch like a scrum master role and it is just one person, they know exactly how to deal with like all the nuances, and it's better than having the variety of like switching things around. Maybe in a newer team where there are not a lot of folks that are fully solidified. It's a newer team, right? You're still figuring things out. You want people to have the experience of being able to lead or program manage or scrum manage a scrum, right? Or be a scrum master. You can have it alternate between the different roles. Maybe it feels more autonomous as a team. Maybe it feels more chaotic as a team to have that. So it differs, and it's okay to try different things out. Like one thing that I did at Vox was we didn't have a project manager, so we weren't following like traditional Scrum. We didn't have the support to do that. I tried a bunch of different things with my team. We went from 2 week sprints to 1 month sprints. We went from agile methodology, like traditional Scrum, to a lean approach, which differs greatly from an agile methodology. So, it's fair to try different things out. It's okay to also say like, hey, we're just going to try this out for a quarter. We'll see what happens and we'll discuss as a team. I think that's very valuable. And you start to see like how the work shifts and changes and how the team reacts to the work. And it's all an interesting kind of science, like a fake science almost.
So I'm going to move to a new question, which is when a new developer enters a company, there's a certain hierarchy imposed by the company. Sometimes this hierarchy is small and narrow, and sometimes it's very wide. So take, for example, a developer who might be contact with a product owner or product manager or a scrum master, while others might have contact with the tech lead solely or both. I think we've highlighted a good amount of this, of the hierarchy in the conversation, but usually like a typical hierarchy is like there's a CEO, there's a CTO, but sometimes the CTO cannot be there. There's now a head of engineering, which I didn't know that a head of engineering can substitute for a CTO.
Yeah.
which is something new for me. And then after the CTO, you have, let's say, the VP, and then
You
you
have some
have,
type of manager role. Let's say that.
so under down is just like the manager handles, let's say, a manager down, then there's the developer. So
Yeah.
you start with, let's say, a CTO, and then you have I'm going to say this, a VP, and then you have an engineering manager, and then a tech lead, then a senior, then the developer. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would just be careful of like how we organize the like the reporting lines. But yeah, all the way at the bottom you have the individual contributors, and the reason why they're at the bottom of the hierarchy is because they're contributing to the work. They're not managing people, right? Um, if you are managing someone, right, in corporate speak or corporate hierarchy, you're responsible for them, right? Like you should be making sure that they feel comfortable. If you're at a company outing, company dinner, you're the person with the most seniority, so you get the corporate credit card and you pay for the dinner, right? Things like that, like that hierarchy that we understand, like, oh yeah, this person's my boss, they could fire me, right? That kind of thing. So you at the bottom you get the individual contributors, and there's levels to them, right? Like you mentioned that you have interns, engineers, senior engineers, tech leads, like they get different titles and that sort of thing. You get to mix around in that area. Once you become a people manager, right, that's when you get another level of corporate hierarchy, another corporate spoke, and that's your manager. You could be called anything really as a manager. You called a engineering manager, be called a director, right? You could be senior manager. Those titles kind of shift around. We mentioned, right? You then have you may or may not have like a director or a VP managing managers, or senior engineer manager, managers. Depends on how many levels you want in the middle management / senior management. You can have a head of engineering or a CTO come in, sit on top of all of engineering, right, to ensure engineering practices across everything and everyone, all the levels are, what we expect it to be. But yeah, if you're coming in, expect some sort of leveling system there where you're reporting into someone. Um, and if you wanted to kind of better understand, like, who should I pay attention to? Like, who am I reporting into? Just know that you're going to have an engineering leader, and that person is your boss. Your boss may have additional levels. Also, within your team, you'll have roles like the product manager, a project manager. Most of the time they are individual contributors as well. They're not managing people because they're solely dedicated to managing a product, a program, a project, whatever it is. And so if you do have questions or you are getting interviewed by a product, project, program manager, you should be asking specific questions around that because that's their domain, that's their expertise. So if I'm let's say I'm a product manager and I'm building a product that's like going to be a new technology for pets, right? I have a lot of experience in that domain. I have a lot of experience about what pets want, what's a good product for pets, and I'm doing the market research around that. And so if I'm interviewing an engineer who's going to be contributing to our software solution for pets, right? Um, I I would basically want to have someone who's able to help take my requirements and make them a reality, right? So I'm probably going to ask questions around like, how have you worked with other, how do you take product requirements and break it down into work that you can contribute to? If we're working in a specific stack, I may ask those questions, but I'm mostly focused on the actual product. I may not even have any tech experience. So that's one thing that you can be aware of when you're doing interviews. And then you have like engineering manager who maybe they were an engineer and they went through the whole process. Maybe they went from an engineer to an engineering manager role. So they'll be able to ask more in-depth questions like, oh, how have you worked with Python? How have you worked with Java? When you have this type of system, what are the things that you're thinking about? Can you tell us about a time when you worked on a project? And they'll be able to understand like, what is your mindset and like, how are you as an engineer? So they're able to level you more than what a product manager is able to do from an engineering standpoint. And that's what you should be aware of, is that there are different people in the company that have different concerns. And as you go like further and further up in the corporate ladder, what people are able to manage differs. Like the difference between an engineering manager and a CTO is the scope at which they focus on the problems, right? And each level has its own like visibility into different problems. The higher up you go, the less you're able to interact with individual contributors and understand the daily day to day of like the challenges that they encounter, right? As an engineering manager, I'm very close. As a IC, I am experiencing the problems. I am solving the problems. So it just differs. And when it comes to management, like it just depends on what you prefer and what you enjoy.
That's a lot of management.
Yeah.
That's like so complicated. Like they just made it very complicated to manage stuff. Like, wouldn't there be an easy thing? And then some other title will come up, completely random title about managing something you won't even expect that exists in the first place.
Yeah. And I think that's why we see different verticals and different organizations within engineering. Like, like most commonly people understand the software developer, the software engineer title, right? But then you get things like risk assurance, like risk manager, risk operations manager. You get QA, you get DevOps, SRE type roles, like so many different kinds of roles, but it's just to address like particular challenges that are within the ecosystem. So that's when you get those specialties, and you're focused mostly on one kind of problem or one kind of area of problems, and that happens as well. And the pattern, or at least like the corporate structure for that, mimics like what we've gone over in this podcast episode. So this will hopefully help anyone who you may be very confused about like who reports into who, and what is a VP versus a director versus a head of. It took me a while to figure it out, and ever since I like came to understand it, I also understand like how decisions are being made. How much control does a manager have over my career? Like how much control do I get to have, and influence do I get to have in an org? And it helps you do different things. Like as an IC, it helps you manage your relationships like with fellow engineers, but then also like manage your relationships up. As a middle management, it helps you practice like managing down and across and up. So um, there's different ways to get what you want in your career, and some of it requires like communicating with the right people and getting mentored in the right ways. So um, getting to understand what the corporate hierarchy is at first is really helpful.
So I'm gonna shift to a different question, which is, as someone who is starting out in the tech field, what kind of advice you would give if you're giving it to a younger version to yourself? So assuming the fact, like, let's say someone is starting out and you look at them in the lens of when you started out, what kind of advice you would give yourself? So sometimes people might dive into something like might benefit them, but might not benefit them long term. What's your kind of take on this?
Yeah, I think if I were to go back and talk to myself as a younger developer, I would definitely say to focus on your growth and understanding and learning. I think when I first started, I desperately wanted to showcase that I was able to contribute, and like that I deserve to be here, and everybody deserves, the role that they have. They deserve what they have. But I think that I spent a lot of time trying to people please within the org and like figure out like, oh, I need to do this and this, and like, oh, there's this project that I'm working on and I want to make sure that everything goes well with it, when I was just the individual contributor. And you're going to be working in a team, and there are going to be times in your career where you do have to prioritize, like take responsibility of the project and prioritize like everything else that's going on. But like if you're starting out, make sure that you're learning the skills that you need to learn. Make sure you're spending the time on tasks that are important to you, or that are going to help you grow, because you're going to have so much more time in your career to make it about someone else. You know, when you're a tech lead, you're responsible for a lot. You know, your decisions matter. How you delegate the work matters. You know, when you're an intern or entry level engineer, you don't have to care about that. Like you can just pick up tickets that are going to help and work, and feature requirements that are going to let you use that cool new technology, learn more skills, get promoted into a senior engineer, like get like all of your career goals met without you having to people manage, people please, really even care about like the small things and the small details. And I would have liked it if someone just told me to focus more on like my goals instead of putting so much pressure on myself to make all the projects that I was a part of, all the work that I was a part of succeed, because it's not your business. Later on, it'll be. And later on, if you want it to be, it will be, right? But, you know, when you're first starting out, I really recommend people like spend time also getting mentored, right? Like spend time for you. The work is for you. The experience is for you. There are going to be other engineers, other contributors, other people that are going to be more senior than you, taking care of you and teaching you. Make sure you're open to that versus trying to just kind of shove it all away and be like, oh, I'm going to contribute or I'm going to get this work done. I think sometimes we can be so focused on the goal or the outcome that we just forget that, oh, this experience, me being where I am right now, it's for me more than anyone else. And I really recommend that. Like when I'm interviewing or when I'm thinking about producing like internship programs or opportunities on my team, I tell everybody ahead of time, like, this is going to be a rewarding experience for us because we're getting to mentor and we're getting to grow someone else. And it's a very valuable and rewarding experience, as hard as it is, as sometimes nuanced as it is. So if you all are like have the gracious opportunity of being able to get mentored, like you are starting off in an internship or an entry level role, like take up people's time, ask questions and that sort of thing, and you'll get so much more out of it.
So when you say people please, like you would come up and try to solve a solution for someone, then you try to solve a solution for someone else, or you take responsibility for things just so you can get the attention, the fact that you're a good developer is.
Yeah. I actually experienced that a lot in my first role because oftentimes you come in and you're aware of the fact that there is a corporate hierarchy, right? There's also a natural progression in your role where you're like, oh well, I'm the intern or I'm the entry level junior developer, right? And there's a senior developer and a principal and a staff and all this other stuff. And so you're kind of thinking of like, well, how do I get there as quick as possible? Or how do I level up, and how do I know that I'm leveling up? There's a part of me that was like, I'll just appease the people around me and that will work. But in reality, like when I realized that that doesn't work. And you know, like focusing on everybody else makes you forget about your strengths and what you can accomplish. And I believe 100% that if you're looking for a promotion, if you're looking to get to the next level, you have to believe and operate at that level first before anyone else is going to believe in you or test you or any of that stuff. And so the more that you can kind of focus in on the work and the things that are interesting to you and solving problems the way that you want to solve them, the more you'll be able to stand out and see and be someone known for something that no one else has done. And that's what's fundamentally changed a lot of my career, especially when it comes to management too. Like I am proud of the fact that I am a manager that, you know, a company has never seen before. And I manage in a way that is different, and people know. And when people are thinking about like, hey, like, what should I do in this situation? They're like, oh, I'll ask Tiffany. That's really cool. Like, that's how you get, I think that's how you truly stand out and be appreciated and known for what you do. And I think oftentimes like when people are thinking about like, how can I get to promotion, the next step, it's not about the promotion, it's something else. Like whether it's for you to be recognized for what you do, like me, or like that's my motivation, right? Or it's to be truly excellent at what you do, right? Like there's a value of excellence in there, and the harder that you, or the more in depth that you try to ask yourself these questions of like why, the more you realize that there are so many different ways to do things, and that feel better for you than forcing yourself to go down a path that you think is like the right approach, or you lock yourself into this path that isn't for you. And that's something that I realize, and that I also help people with often when it comes to coaching.
Just don't hold all of your eggs in one basket. That's the kind of thing. Just don't
Yeah.
don't try to do a lot of things. Just take one thing and just do it right, and you'll be recognized for this, rather than just doing 17 things and might fail at almost all of them.
I think oftentimes too, we expand the scope of our work. Like, I remember, working on one ticket and thinking that, I tried to think about the future a little bit more than I was like focused on the actual work at hand. And I think as a engineer, it's good to be aware of like what's coming down, what's coming next, right? But also trust that you don't have to be the person managing what's coming next, especially if you're just starting out. You don't have to manage what's coming next. If you do, that's great. If you're not able to, there are people around you that you can lean on, that you can talk to, that you can kind of strategize around. And that's really helpful. That's something that is a career accelerator and not a career deterrent, which sometimes it feels like once you focus so heavily on like what you want, and you're so focused on that outcome, that you try to push people away. And that's when, you see things like, um, the solo expert on a team, or someone who knows a lot but they are not willing to mentor other people. They're It's like the grumpy developer in the corner, right? And that's where it comes from.
So I'm gonna move to a different question, which is, as someone who is hiring developers at their company, should the company aim towards hiring someone who's 100% fit on a technical level, but this person might not fit on a, let's say, personal level? Or should the company aim towards someone who might not be 100% fit technical, but fits on a personal level? So this person might have the work ethics, or they might feel like he's the kind of person who might stay good for a good while at the company. Some companies might resolve towards hiring someone who is 100% technical to fit the role that they're working in, to just satisfy the demand of a client, while they might not stay for a very long time, or they might do things that, let's say, for an example, they might have problems, or they might leave, or they might shift around. Whereas this person who might not be, let's say, 100% fit might stay longer but requires more additional care and training. So someone who is, especially when someone is starting out, they might not have the full technical, let's say, expertise. They might require additional training. You might need to vet them to fit in your company's, I'm going to say this, structure. Whereas, let's say, someone who's more technical, who's been, let's say, a senior, might have an easier way of understanding the structure and enters too quickly. Would you like to give your take on this?
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions on this, because I don't think that there is a right or wrong answer. It just depends on what you're able to manage as a hiring manager, or as someone who would, if you're hiring someone, they'd be reporting into you. One thing that I try to think about when I am hiring is, am I able to work with this person, and am I able to coach them? Because I think at the end of the day, too, is if I hire someone who's not 100% technical fit, maybe they need some training, maybe they need a little bit more nuance, maybe they need, whatever it is that they need. I am willing to acknowledge that and hire them on, if I'm able to work with this person, and this person is open and has like the intention of going from point A to point B with me on the work, right? I think there needs to be some sort of openness in that sense, because if someone were to come on, they're not the right technical fit, and they said, this is the right approach and this is the only way that I'm going to do it, it's just not going to work. It's going to cause friction between myself and whoever is going to be reporting to me. It's going to cause friction on the team, where, if I am able to guide the direction, there is a reason why we're why we exist as a team, and this person is just not open to it, there's just no way that that's going to work. That's just a bad hire at that point, right? There's no way to like kind of sugarcoat it. That's wrong. There are situations where I do see myself being able to support this person. This is really great. But from a technical standpoint, we just don't have the bandwidth to have it be a good experience. And the empathetic part of me is like, I don't know if I would feel comfortable bringing on someone who's not going to have a good experience becoming a developer, because what that does is that taints what they see as a career for them, right? And oftentimes this is where you get someone who's new to the industry. They join, they have an awful experience because they're not able to deliver work. They feel bad because their code isn't seen. They feel bad because their contributions don't really fit within the context of the work. And then they quit and they leave tech, right? And that's the last thing that I want to do. I'd rather have this person interview some more at other companies, find a workplace and an environment that can help support them and help them grow, where maybe they're surrounded by three other senior engineers, where maybe my team only has one senior engineer and we're not able to help them technically get better. And sometimes like it's fine, like, as an engineering manager you can help coach around that. There are other times when you have to be able to evaluate as an engineering manager that I'm not able to support this person, and it's not anything personal. It's just professionally, I'm not able to make this the experience that I have as a standard for my team. And of course, like when you're interviewing and you're like talking to other people managers, understand what their standards are. Like what is okay, what kind of team are they building, right? Like what's okay to them, what's good enough, and what is not good enough. And for me, like I know that what my standards are, and I expect I it's something that brings more people who have the same standards into my team. Um, when it comes to hiring people who are 100% technical fits, I think it's best to understand what their goals are and what their intentions are. Because oftentimes, like if you're 100% fit and your goal is to continue growing and being challenged, and the work at hand is doesn't make the most of your skills and your goals, you're not going to have a good time. And if you're not having a good time, I'm probably not going to have a good time. And I acknowledge that. There are also people who are 100% technical fits, but very toxic in nature. Maybe their delivery is really bad or harmful or hurtful. You can have situations that are like that. And in terms of building, like, that's when I go back to my standard. Like, what kind of environment am I building? If someone is not open to feedback where I'm sharing like, hey, that was hurtful. And sometimes like that's the thing is if you have something that comes up that's hurtful or toxic, and I most likely call you out in public on that, because that is something that is a behavior that needs to be, like understood by the team, that that's not okay. you know are you open to that? Are you going to react in a extreme way, right? Those are all things that I'm thinking in the back of my head. So sometimes stuff like that comes up. I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. Oftentimes you do have to make a hire that is 100% technical fit. I don't think it's always one or the other. You can have 100% technical fit and someone who's really great, but there are times when you're starting out a team, or maybe you are starting a startup, right? And you need to get that fit. You need to get it right the first time. You may decide that that's a hire that you want to make. Is that a long-term hire? I don't know. Is that something that are you going to plan around this person? I don't know. But it is worthwhile to, for folks who maybe you're 100% technical fit, but you realize like, I might not be a good fit for this company culturally. Just understand that you're going to be spending X amount of time a week with the people that you work with, solving problems. Like, what is that experience going to be like? And are you going to be a contributor, a deterrent, or a amplifier of that culture? Just acknowledge that, I think, because your experiences will vary.
But the people who are not technical fit, and they, let's say for an example, they tried to apply for the company, they didn't work out, and they went and applied to other companies, and they didn't get any kind of role, and now they're sitting thinking themselves, okay, I don't have a job. I'm still searching and I didn't find it, and they might leave tech. Some of them might resolve towards entering into a boot camp, but the problem with boot camps is that some of them do take advantage of the learner. So some of them, like for an example, they say like, okay, we'll give you the experience to become technically fit, but they put like, let's say, a certain contract between them and the learner. They might take advantage of the learner at some level, which is something we're starting to see. It's a thing. So there's a huge amount of people, but the problem is there's minimum amount of roles, and the role to enter in requires a certain level to enter. So some of those beginners who are starting out in the tech field, they might not have this technical level that the company expects. So they resolve towards going towards a boot camp as an example. But the problem with boot camps is now they realize like, oh, this is something that's now happening. There's a lot of people who want to enter into jobs, they're not fit. So we give you the opportunity to become a fit person, but there's a certain contract that puts you in a very bad position. You might have to sacrifice, let's say, your first paycheck, or you have to pay X amount of money, let's say, for a year. Depends on the case. What's your take on this? I'm a person who actually learned to write code on his own. I never went to a boot camp, even though a lot of people did advise me at a very young age to go towards boot camp, but I didn't. I went towards the hard path. Like I got the job a very hard way of learning code on my own. But
Yeah.
some people don't have the luxury of sitting down, spending time on a computer. They just want to get a job because they have bills to pay, they have things
Yeah.
that they need to do. So what's your take on this, especially the fact that boot camps starting to get more and more into these days as well and taking advantage of learners at some level?
Yeah, yeah. I think that what you're discussing or describing is an ISA, which is like an incentive service agreement, which is something that is often how people pay for the boot camp experience. You essentially get this contract at the start where you agree to contribute or at least share some of your initial compensation. And sometimes like it's for like a duration of a year or 2 years, and so you don't whatever salary you get, whatever compensation you get, you're is essentially only getting a portion of that and giving the other portion to the boot camp. And that can be pretty lucrative, and advantageous to the boot camp services, especially if like that boot camp experience didn't fully meet your expectations. Maybe they didn't the boot camp experience wasn't like what it was advertised to be, which that is in and of itself the definition of fraud, right? um, I think if you are like considering a boot camp approach, really think about like do some investigation on the ISA agreements, right? Because I don't think people should be going into debt to get into tech. um, if you are struggling with the interview process and landing that first role, I would think about where in the process are you struggling, because you may feel as if you're not a technical fit, but then realize, oh, it's because they were trying to hire a more senior person, and I just so happened to be applying for roles that were maybe not titled senior, but were senior in nature, or the expectation was that I was supposed to be senior. And so it may not be like you not having the technical ability, because I suspect if you're applying for roles, you do have something on your resume that showcases the technical skills that you do have. You've put those skills into practice at a certain level of proficiency, and that proficiency just wasn't what they were expecting. And it can be really hard to level that when you're looking at a job description. Oftentimes people will throw around like a very vague job description, and then once you interview, you realize, oh, this person's looking for a senior person. They just didn't say that. So look at it from that perspective. And then, like I said, realize where in the interview process are you failing. If you're failing at the recruiter stage, it must be a logistical or something that you're saying, or because a recruiter or a hiring manager, you won't get a recruiter call if your resume did not pique interest. So something on your resume there was either technology or a project or something in there that hooked them in, and something that you said in that recruiter screen was off to them. Maybe it was something that you said around your goals, why you're leaving your next company, why you're trying to get into tech, maybe something like that. It's very logistical, right? If you're failing in the hiring manager interview, um, it is going to be a good thing because the hiring manager is going to be your manager, and you'd want them to be able to suss out if they're going to want to work with you or not. If you're failing in the technical aspect after you've spoken to a hiring manager, or you're just failing in the technical aspect in general, figure out what was the problem, or what was like sort of the part question, or like part where they were like, oh, I don't know if this person's a good fit, because you may be able to address those aspects and then just hyper focus in on being able to answer the types of questions that you're failing on, because you don't need to know everything to be able to get a job. I will oftentimes ask questions that I know maybe someone won't know the answer to. That's fine. I know who they are. Like at the end of the day, I'll know like where they're at level in terms of technical ability. You know, where are they at in terms of career goals and that sort of thing, and then make a decision based off of that. So just acknowledge like where are you failing in. Sometimes people will think like, oh, maybe I'm not a good technical fit when they just didn't answer a behavioral question correctly, or like to the degree that it represents who they are as a person or who they would be in a team setting. So you get situations like that, and so the interview process itself will tell you some things about yourself, and then you can hyper tune it. Basically, it does take some trial and error. Like the first couple of times I interviewed, it wasn't because I wasn't it wasn't because I didn't deserve to be in tech or that there was something wrong with me. It was just I didn't know how to interview, and sometimes that's the reality of it. And if you can just pay attention to where in the process, at the very minimum. I know it hurts, but getting rejected hurts, right? And I know it's like it can be a really time crunch if you have like to pay for bills, you don't have a job, you need that money, you need a paycheck, you need some type of job, right? But just get really clear on like where did you mess up, right? And if you're interviewing for multiple companies or you're applying to multiple companies, make sure you stagger things out. Make sure you stagger out and schedule out your interview process so that so that if you do need practice and you acknowledge that you need practice, that you're putting those job roles that need to be first, and then you're doing the next, a first round for another company later, and that sort of thing. You can schedule things out. So do that. Make sure that you're kind of building that interview muscle, because I've seen a lot of really talented engineers who are amazing technical fit, amazing behavioral and cultural fit, just don't get the job offer because, oh, there was maybe another candidate or like something that they said was off, and it had nothing to do with them. It was just how they interviewed.
But is there something wrong if I emailed, let's say, the manager or let's say the HR, asking them why did I fail?
I don't think that there's a problem with it. I think that in terms of like legality and how a people team will handle that differs from company to company. Sometimes, like the feedback that I give on a candidate that I put in the HR system doesn't get back to the candidate, and that can happen. One thing that I try to do is when I interview and I know someone may not be a good fit, I'll ask additional questions. So like if I'm speaking about like why my team exists, like what the work is, and someone doesn't look too excited, I'll ask, is that exciting, or does this sound like something that you'd be interested in? And so I give them a chance to say yes or no. Same thing with the technical stuff. Like, if I ask a question, like, I'll also ask, like, do you feel comfortable with this kind of work? Even if they bomb the technical part and they say they're comfortable, you can see how they respond to that, and they know that they're not uncomfortable. So, that gives people the opportunity to realize where their gaps are when it comes to interviewing. And that's kind of a way that I subtly give back feedback without like, because honestly, sometimes like with the corporate system and things like that, you don't get to give feedback. And that's one way that I do it within the interview process.
I actually have like a small story to give. I was trying to apply to AWS. There's a developer advocate role, as I remember. So I applied for the job, And then the person who was hiring, I got rejected, but the person who's hiring was like, messages me on LinkedIn. It's like, hey, look, you have a very good resume. I love these streaks that you have on GitHub, that you have them green, you're working on yourself, all of that. But I'm looking for a senior person. Like, if I had two roles and one a senior and one a junior, I would probably take you for the junior one for a
Yeah.
developer. But we wanted a senior. But the cool part about this is that she came up and told me, like, hey, why don't you join the AWS Community Builders program, which I have been doing for this is the second year. But the cool thing about this is that she messaged me on LinkedIn telling me, like, hey, it's not you. We're just looking for a senior role. Just keep what you're doing, advance forward. There's absolutely nothing wrong with what you're doing at all, but just remember the fact that just this is a senior role, not a junior role. So don't take it hard on yourself, even though you might be kind of fit for on some technical levels.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that kind of feedback lets you realize that that is often the challenges of hiring, right? Is that you meet a lot of people who are talented and passionate about what they do, but it's just like there's no way to make it fit in an organization or what the needs are. And it's not personal, right? It's not even technical sometimes, but it's just like the leveling or what they need at the time, and that can be helpful to hear. And other times it can also be like really hard to hear that often.
So I'm going to move to a different question, which is, as someone who is advancing in their career, what non-technical advice would you advise to accelerate forward in one's career? So certain people might utilize, let's say, utilize your calendar and then time box matter, since you'd start to see the task that you need to do in a time box matter. Some people might advise towards creating, let's say, a daily system, or some people might tell you, like, start doing, let's say, work on X amount of days, and then put, let's say, a day in the week, in the weekday, for example, to rest for a little bit so you don't overwhelm yourself. So what's your take on this, and what would you advise someone about this?
Yeah, I have a couple of tips. I think from a non technical advice standpoint, I think one thing that is always really helpful is having an engineering log, or at least some record of the things that, like each week, the accomplishments that you achieved, the things that you delivered, and having that list that you can feed either in a Slack channel message, or like when it's time for performance reviews, or when it's time to even think about what are your goals for the next quarter, for the next year, because that gives you a chance to see like what is your progress, what did you focus on, do you want to continue focusing in those areas, or do you want to shift into something else. And oftentimes you can also like cross reference what you know with what your manager knows, and then say like, hey, do you think that this technology is something that I should invest more time into learning, or should I just move into, a different area, or I've been thinking more about machine learning, like what do you think about it, is there room for that in the company, is there any tickets that are coming down the road for that, like ask those kinds of questions. And I think that's a really good way to start advancing your career because now you're taking ownership and responsibility over your career conversations. And that's something that we learn often in management workshops and trainings and things like that, is that the employee owns their career conversations. You support what they're able to accomplish, but like at the end of the day, they have to initiate those career conversations. And that's really helpful for, when you are putting together a promo package on behalf of your direct report and that sort of thing, or you are advocating and like making sure that their work is fully represented. And sometimes like that doesn't always happen, but you do it on a regular basis. That's stuff that builds career momentum in the times when you are going to be having those weeks where there's a lot of meetings. Maybe you're not getting as much work done because that just happens, right? Like sometimes there's trainings, sometimes there's PTO, holidays, and all that stuff. The things that carry you through that is like the momentum that you've built up over time. And that's really what a career progression journey looks like. It's all just like trajectory and momentum. It's those two things. And there's different ways to gain them. And if you understand like what it looks like, you'll be able to get further and further ahead quicker, I think. And then, of course, there's the actual technical work at hand that scales with that, right? Like sometimes it just takes time and experience, different kinds of experiences. And as you gain that over time, you start to have like different toolkits and that sort of stuff for everything. In terms of like the calendar and how you organize your day to day, I think it's helpful to find out what your preferences are. I know that there are certain times of the day where, like, if I'm working and I'm super focused, I can get everything I need to get done in 2 hours. And there are other times when I'm not working in my zone of genius, and it's weird. It's a weird week, and it takes me like the whole week to get everything that I need to get done. And there are times when it's like that. Like, acknowledge and be flexible if you are the kind of person that has a lot of fluctuations, and like don't be afraid to make a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet meeting a Slack huddle, or don't be afraid to like suggest moving a meeting further back, right? Like don't move meetings up, I would say, but that's just the faux pas. That's just professional etiquette. But you can move things further back. You can reschedule things. One thing that I like to do personally is I like to have all of my meeting days back to back. So if I know that I'm just going to be spending the whole day on meetings, then I know that I don't have to expect a lot from myself because I'm just going to be in meetings all day, and there are times when you don't get to really choose that and you're typing in between meetings or running around and it's kind of crazy, but you acknowledge that that's just 1 week of the month, or, you time box it. That's how you that's how I time box is I time box, um, my changes and my crazy times, right? Like I tell myself and I tell my team too, whenever there's going to be a period of time where it's just going to be a certain type of work. Maybe there's a week where it's just debugging issues, or like things are failing in production. It's just that this week, and that helps people understand that like it's just temporary. It's just a part of it. Next week it'll be different, or 2 weeks from now it'll be different. And it's helpful to do that kind of stuff. I recommend, that's one thing that I got as advice early on, is just like, if you're going to be doing a lot of transformation, if you're doing a lot of changes, or maybe you're in a chaotic environment, time box, if you're a manager, whoever you are, time box your changes, put a time range on your decisions, put a time range on how things are going to change, because that just gives people reassurance that, okay, maybe I have to do something I hate for like 3 months. Am I okay with that? Am I not okay with that? Versus not knowing at all, and that it's going to be an extended period of time. I think that's something that helps when it comes to change, and just even like the crazy things that happen in your career in general, as you're progressing all the time, that there's so many different things happening. That's one thing that I keep in the back of my mind.
It's more like Parkinson's law, as I remember. Like the amount of time that you give yourself to do something is the time that you actually do it. So if you give yourself 3 months, probably you will finish it in 3 months, but you do it at the end of the 3 months. Versus if you did it, let's say, in 3 hours, you have the 3 hours to do it. So it depends on the context of how much you give yourself time to do it. So if, let's say, you have a project that you need to do in, let's say, 3 months, probably you would start the work, all of it, in like a month or half of the end of the month, and you'll be slacking most of the time. Whereas if you actually know that this is going to take you, let's say, a month, you would just set it as a month.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, there's so many cool like tricks and things that you can do to just manage your time better. I I always see that there's like different tips, and there's so many books out there on how to manage your time. You don't have to use all of them, just know what works for you. I know that the like 25-minute timer, plus break plus 45 extra minutes of work, like that works for some people. It doesn't work for other people. Like try different things out. I know for myself, like I don't like having gaps in my calendar with meetings, so I try to like stack them on top of each other, but that only works after a certain amount of time before it overloads me, things like that. One thing that's nice is you can suggest changes and things like that, or like mention them in retrospectives, and that's a good way to just do like a sanity check either with your team or with your coworkers, that like how your schedule is set up now is works for everybody. like is beneficial and not deterring you. If you're in too many meetings, realizing like what meetings are most important for you to attend, what ones aren't is helpful. That kind of stuff is always good to just like make sure that how you're spending your time is how you want to be spending your time. Not that you always get the choice, but that you're at least aware of like what's helpful, what's not helpful for your schedule, your career advancement, the things that you want to accomplish.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift to a different question, which is you run a podcast called Asleep by the Laptop, which is a podcast that brings clarity and comfort to challenges and topics that keep us up at night. If we say that this podcast is like brain dumping things that, let's say, inside your mind, the stuff that always, like, let's say, something, a topic that runs into my mind, like, let's say, a specific thing happened at work, I might think of it. So you just dump it down into a podcast, or is it something else?
Yeah, so Asleep by the Laptop is actually came from that, like having late night thoughts and not being able to go to sleep, or like having like work dreams and things like that, and like feeling a lot of anxiety before going into a one on one or into like a big project. But then also like a lot of life topics where you're just kind of like Googling late at night and trying to figure something out. Um, Asleep by the Laptop is a podcast series that shares stories about that, but then also goes into the science behind um, either like why that is, why like you have certain thoughts, or it goes behind the science around and science and research around how to alleviate or at least find comfort in those thoughts. And that's something that I started because I found that as I was experiencing moments when I wasn't able to go to sleep, or maybe I spent the whole night like researching something, that I could share the experience with other people and maybe give people a little bit of clarity and a little bit of comfort associated with it, and just know that like it's not just you, you're not the only one, and and that there's a lot of stories and people who experience something similar. And so that's why I started it. It was a part of just like late night comfort. I think it's a comfort podcast by and large, a lifestyle and comfort podcast.
So, along with the podcast, you also stream on Twitch on a consistent basis where you also offer career advice to developers live. So, you brain dump the things that happens in your mind on the podcast, and then you go, let's say, live on Twitch to do offer career advice or talk with people through live. So, what is like when you talk on live, like for an example, you stream on Twitch, you prefer to stream with people because it gives you like a genuine conversation with people in the chat. They'll ask you like a question and you would answer it like a Q&A? Or is it because you don't like the whole idea of pre-recording things because you want some interactivity when doing live? Because when you pre-record stuff, you might have the chance of saying, oh, okay, I just remove this part, I might alter this part and stuff like that. But while streaming is more like a genuine kind of thing where I'm showing people things as it is.
Yeah, I would say that when I'm recording for Sleep by the Laptop, there's a lot of research that goes into place. Like I'm borrowing from different mental health articles. I'm borrowing from research that's being done on a mental health level. I'm borrowing like laws and theories from an engineering standpoint. A lot of it isn't all tech related. A lot of it is like more life centric, life topics, things that maybe a technical audience can still even relate to. And that feels good to me because it's an expression of just like conversations and relating to people who have a variety of different experiences. Like it just brings us all together under the common thread of, yeah, there are things that happen, there's shit that happens, and you have you it keeps you up at night, and it's something that you want to solve and like understand. One thing that I realized is that in my 9 to 5, I'm contained to interacting with the tech folks that report with me, that work with me. And on Twitch or online, I get to interact with people who have a variety of experiences that are very different from mine. And actually, when I ended up streaming at Twitch, it was just because I used to do a lot of Twitter spaces. I used to host a lot of Twitter spaces. And every Wednesday night, anyone who worked in tech could come in and just like we would talk about different tech topics. And Twitch was like an extension of that so that um, I could really interact with people in that genuine way, like you said. So yeah, it was a in podcast land, it's a one-way communication street, right? It's all recorded. Like, I mean, you may be able to pull in like some commentary, but it's not live. In Twitch, you're able to do that, and Twitter Spaces, you're able to do that. One thing that I like about streaming and helping people is that I just get to be as creative as I want with it, whether it's through like hosting a bingo night or like directly screen sharing and editing resumes or even like getting to know other industry folks through there. It just is an experience and like a level of creativity that expression that I get to have outside of like who I am as a engineering manager, who I am when I am a podcast host. So that creativity or that self-expression is really important to me, and streaming is just one way that is an outlet for that.
Yep. I always end the podcast with a mental health question. It's something that I always do, which is, have you ever faced burnout or imposter syndrome? And if you did, what do you do to resolve towards this issue?
Yeah, I have a lot, especially in my career. I in when I was a tech evangelist, actually, I faced a lot of burnout, and it came in the form of physical pain, actually, and sometimes like you just realize that um, you can only keep pushing yourself so hard all the way up until there's like a cracking point, right? There's a point where like, oh gosh, stuff actually has to change a lot too, and that came around. Uh, yeah, it came within the pandemic situation, which funny and like not funny enough, but like coincidentally or maybe not so coincidentally, that was a lot of people's experience too, as they realized like, oh, there does need to be a lot that changes. And I think for me, I needed to have a identity outside of work. Like I needed to have appreciation and um, a reigniting of like who I am, what do I want to achieve outside of work. And it was hard because at that time like I was finishing my master's degree while working at a startup full time, and like, I didn't have a lot of time for myself. And in the moments where I had to get something done, I really had to get something done, and I would push through it. And you don't really think much about yourself in that sense, right? Everybody around you tells you, "Oh, make sure you take time off, make sure you're taking care of yourself." But it's really hard to prioritize that and do that if you don't even care about doing that. And I think I just needed a shift in my mindset where I was like, oh, I actually do need to take care of myself because I'm starting to look like I don't take care of myself. And so one thing that I recommend to people is do a check-in for yourself. Like, when was the last time that you got really, really excited by an accomplishment that you made? Are you just like collecting accomplishments without actually making them feel like accomplishments? If you're setting goals, like, why are you setting those goals? Is it just for the sake of setting a goal? Could you set a goal that means more to you? I think stuff like that gives you like self compassion and self love eventually. And it can be really hard to like yourself, especially because in tech, we're solving a lot of problems and we always feel like we're somehow behind those problems because we are. We're chasing them down. We're slowly like working at them, right? And it can be really hard to appreciate yourself and like yourself for the small wins or even the big wins sometimes because you're like, oh well, on to the next thing or on to the next problem. And I really recommend that people do a little bit for yourself every day because you are a gift. What you offer is more than what you do at work. And I think it's always helpful to just have a little sanity check that is the case.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode. If you liked it, then feel free to watch our previous episodes and feel free to follow us on social media and rate us on your favorite podcast app of choice.